Hello and welcome to this discussion of Purgatorio, Canto 8. I'm Claudia Rossignoli from the University of St Andrews, and I have the great pleasure of introducing you my partner in this conversation, Daragh O'Connell from University College Cork. Hello, Daragh, how are you?
Hi, Claudia, how are you? Great to see you.
I'm very well, thank you. It's indeed a delight to be able to discuss this with you because this particular canto is very, very often celebrated for its poetic qualities, for its emotional intensity. But I hope we'll be able today to kind of sort of uncover some of the more intricate, complex texture that the canto sort of brings to the reader. And there are a lot of hints of the many things that this canto is trying to do, even if it is sort of sandwiched between a lot of very important things. And we tend to sort of read it being very much carried away by the nostalgic, contemplative mode of the very beginning. But we will discuss in that there is a lot more to it than that very, very famous opening, isn't it?
Oh, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think this rereading is there. I think Canto 8 of Purgatorio it's like a minor miracle of kind of narrative cohesion, because in a way it moves seamlessly between the divine, the political, and most importantly also the personal, for Dante at least. And these histories are kind of intertwined all the time within it. As well as, I think this is an important aspect, we have this invoking of future time as well towards the end of the canto. It anticipates so much of what will happen also later on in the canticle. So it's a very interesting canto from that perspective. But I mean, as you quite rightly say, the tone is set at the very beginning, and what a beginning it is.
Yes, what a beginning it is. We will read that beginning because we can't discuss Purgatorio 8 without reading that beginning. But before we get to the verses, I think what very much sort of always strikes me when I read those verses is how the intensity of the emotion that is described in these verses is real, how authentic it feels to read the description of this melancholic separation from the land to which one feels they belong. And I think when we were discussing, we were mentioning precisely how almost necessary, intrinsically indispensable is the real experience of exile, of that separation from the motherland, for Dante to actually being able to describe in such precise emotional detail what it means to long the land to which you can no longer return. Purgatorio 8 opens, as many of you probably remember, with these two very famous terzine. Era già l'ora che volge il disio ai naviganti e intenerisce il core, lo dican detto ai dolci amici addio, e che lo nuovo peregrin d'amore punge, se ode squilla di lontano, che paia il giorno pianger che si more. Is an incredible, beautiful representation of longing and of that gentle, bitter but sweet sorrow that embodies the migrant, we can say, somebody who has to leave the land and looks back at the land they can no longer hold. The sort of most straightforward translation, it was already the hour that turns back the desire of seafarers and softens their hearts on the day they have said farewell to their sweet friends, the hour that pieces the new pilgrim with love, if he hears a bell far off that seems to mourn the dying day. And of course, that dying day sort of sets the atmosphere for the whole canto to come. Il giorno pianger che si more, that kind of sort of slow death of the light that is abandoning is as a very kind of sort of suspensive intention to it. And it is reminding us of that sense of distance. It is making us think of the sadness of separation. But at the same time, I think is also preparing us, making us expectant for something momentous to happen, isn't it?
No, I think you're dead right. And I mean, I think firstly, I think we should sound the fact that the kind of contemporary resonance of these lines for, if you look around the world today, for these forced migrations and people being uprooted and forced from one place to another, to look back to your homeland, this kind of exilic yearning, this nostalgia. And remember, nostalgia is, a sickness for home, to give it its proper meaning. These verses can only have been written by someone who suffered the pain of separation from community, from family, from city, and I think for that reason alone, we need to be aware about what's really going on in this canto. As you said, you signaled there the light, the dying of the light, the dying of the day, and this liturgical hymn, the Te Lucis Ante, is the perfect hymn for this time of the day, the dying of the day, the encroaching light. And it is a liturgical hymn that is calling out for clemency, is calling out for protection from what can happen at night, the temptation of sin. So this really does set the whole scene for us, and at the same time ring the bell of exile. Exile as a kind of a dominant motif here in this canto for Dante, and how he will also, as we're going to see at the very end of the canto, be given yet another prophecy about his own impending exile from Florence, but the kind of wider theme of exile as well, and that kind of eternal exile also that people feel because of the resonances between, shall we say, the valley of the negligent rulers and the limbo of the poets. Virgil's eterno esilio, his eternal exile, to be exiled from God for all eternity. So exile is everywhere here, and it is this kind of mournful yearning for something.
But it's also the approaching of the night with the risks that it brings, and this kind of sort of liturgical moment in preparation is also, I think, a hint at the untamable fear that comes with exile, that comes with being uprooted from your land. I mean, obviously, Dante here in this opening line refers to the peregrin d'amore, but he is a traveler in not only obviously fictionally here as a character in the comedy, but he is in the process of traveling, and it is that fear of the unknown, of knowing what you've left behind and not knowing what you're going to find ahead. So there is hope, but there's also great fear. And I think here the assembly, to a certain extent, of the team that we encounter in this particular canto is selected precisely to establish almost like a new starting point. We see a kind of sort of transition that is certified and legitimized by the presence of the specific people that Dante encounters in this canto. And there's also there's an interesting interplay here between the very real, authentic emotions that are evoked, but also the symbolic representations within which they are inscribed at this particular moment, a very momentous moment of the pilgrim's journey.
Definitely, and I think we mentioned at the very top there about the various different things going on between the divine, the political, and the personal in the sense of universal histories and political histories. This stage managing that Dante is involving here, it brings this cluster of cantos, these political cantos, to a kind of very sharp focus here towards the end, because Dante wants to finish off at a particular point with a particular set of characters with which he's going to discourse. And at the same time, we also have the pageant, this the arrival of the two angels, the arrival also of the adversary, the serpent in the garden. And remember, and I think we need to remember this, that the kind of strange descriptions that have happened in previous cantos of the actual valley of the negligent rulers, because the terms that are used to describe the so-called natural setting of the valley are actually very artificial. They're precious stones, they're gems. It's not the natural language that Dante will use in the earthly paradise later in the Canticles. So there is something odd about it. And it anticipates the pageant of the earthly paradise, because in many respects, Anti-Purgatory kind of plays out in minor key what will unfold and be given much fuller expression in the Purgatory proper. And it is, we have the two angels, we have the serpent, but it is also then the encounter with Nino Visconti and Corrado Malaspina. But for me, I think, and this is slightly a side issue, one of the things that I particularly like about this canto, and the things I would often signal to students, is how Dante personaggio himself comes center stage. Mm-hmm. To this point, Sordello has been completely taken in and obsessed by the figure, by the reputation, by the Gloria di Latin, by Virgil, and he's kind of pushed Dante to the side and slightly ignored him as, well, who is this person? I'm here talking to Virgil. And poor old Dante is kind of waiting for his moment. And his moment actually comes when they descend into the valley to encounter these rulers. And when he's going to be recognized as a living being, with the changing of the light, when Dante will actually articulate the fact that he is still alive, that both Nino Visconti and Sordello will be come gente di subito smarrita. And as we know, smarrita is a term as part of a very specific lexis that Dante uses, not least in Canto 1 of the Inferno. So what is happening here is that Dante now is, if you like, he has more agency within this kind of triumvirate of the three poets, whereas prior to that he didn't. And this obviously will have fuller articulation with the three poets of Statius, Virgil, and Dante, where Dante plays the very important role of, if you like, making sure that the recognition happens between them. The Italian vernacular poet is very much introducing epic poetry, epic Latin poetry to each other later on. But here, Dante now, and Dante's mission, Dante's journey, is coming to the fore in this particular encounter.
Mm-hmm. And he points that to us, doesn't he, quite clearly at some point. Aguzza quel lettor ben gli occhi al vero. I mean, Dante has this habit of telling us very clearly when he wants us to pay attention. But sometimes, we would wonder what is happening here, actually, that we need to pay so much attention to. And I think you're absolutely right. Is this sense of assuming the responsibility that journey and that narrating that journey entails, and I think that's why it's important that the poets and the political agents are here to witness this decision, this coming, as you said, center stage, this understanding that there is the need to step forward, to take forward that leadership, politically perhaps, but also more importantly poetically, that he feels is needed in his time. And I think the fact that all this happens at a very particular point of the journey is obviously telling us that, to a certain extent, their experience of exile, their experience of political disillusionment, their experience of understanding the weaknesses of the political leadership is what makes this political and poetic maturation happens.
And true, and equally, this is all happening in the context also of this nightly pageant, with the arrival of the angels, with the encroachment into the valley of this serpent that will be driven out. And this is something that that happens on a nightly basis, although the individuals in the valley are ostensibly saved, but it is played out every evening as a kind of reminder to mankind, to these rulers, of their own negligence, and also to the grace of God, whereby you can lead in a certain sense, but you can forget about your other responsibilities. And Dante is surrounded by figures who, many of whom are not actually concentrating on this nightly pageant, because it is repeated endlessly, if you like, on the mountain every evening. Whereas the characters that he encounters want to talk to him, because something novello, something new is happening with the character of Dante amongst them and in their presence. So Dante's actual presence is something that is very important here, for these characters to plead with him to get prayers on their behalf, intercessory prayers, and this is something we've seen earlier on when he met with other characters. But it is also a way for Dante to make a couple of points as well through these characters, as he does all the time. And I think that it is the choice of Nino Visconti and Corrado Malaspina are very, very interesting, not least because of the obvious thing that one is a Guelph and the other is a Ghibelline, but the shared history with Dante in the case of Visconti, where he will talk about the innocence of the daughter, and which makes us think back to how, if you look back into the Inferno, you say Ugolino, and Visconti is the grandson of Ugolino, and already once you understand that kind of parentela, you understand that Dante is making yet another further point on what happened in the Torre della Fame, that he is
terrible leadership.
Yes, but he is also showing that that by focusing on his daughter Giovanna, to pray for him. I think at the time she's 9 years old. That gets her to pray for him to speed his journey on the mountain. That we were talking about the innocence of the child, of the children, and how in the case of the Inferno, what happened with Ugolino's children, that they suffered for the sins of the father. Dante is very, very strong on these particular things. About the innocence of children. Equally, Corrado Malaspina will be given that not only will Dante praise the family name, and he does it, if you like, it's kind of a retrospective but preemptive praise of that particular family. And again, within that context, I think it's quite interesting, and it goes back to Nino. You could even talk about it in the case of the description of the angels. There's this kind of strange, courtly, chivalrous kind of language that is imbued throughout the canto, which is talking about nobility. And Dante's cortese opinione, which is greeted by Malaspina with some gratitude. And it is through this gratitude that he will then tell Dante in no uncertain terms, and the language that he will use with this kind of nail, this ti fia chiavata in mezzo della testa con maggior chiovi, that Dante will be on the receiving end within 6 years of his own exile. So this, yet again, we have this prophecy of an impending doom for Dante. But I think what is important in that is that Christ's crucifixion, when we think of nails, we think of the crucifixion of Christ, that Dante ultimately has salvation or gains salvation through the redemption of Christ. And it's this that idea of Dante through faith, the Dante who was so enraptured by the words of the liturgical hymn at the beginning of our canto, Te luce ante, when he says, che fece me a me uscir di mente. I just was so taken in by this. And I love this me a me, because it reminds me then, if you go back to Canto 13 of the Inferno, and you think of somebody else who lost hope, you think of Pier della Vigne, and it is ingiusto fece me contro me giusto. So Dante gains salvation through this blood sacrifice of Christ.
But it's also a very important sort of political lesson, isn't it? That we need to move out of ourselves sometimes to see what the other side thinks, and to understand that to move forward as a community, we cannot stay within ourselves. And, you know, we see in our contemporary society what extreme partisanship is doing to our politics. And this really resonates, this idea of putting together people of different, you know, a Guelph and a Ghibelling, of different political beliefs, and harmoniously decide on and agree, more importantly, on what needs to be done, and what is the good for the community, and what needs to be left behind, what are the things that needs to be upheld and brought forward. And I think in this sense that there's although the atmosphere, as you said, is very expectant, is very suffused, is very spiritual and very symbolic, there is also in the final hit of the prophecy, the harshness of the brutality of the impoverishment of life, when the capore, or when the unfitting leader is actually destroying the citizens' lives. And I think that especially in our world rings very true when decisions are taken without taking ourselves outside of ourselves and seeing situations in a broader context, in the bigger picture, and understanding that we need to make steps to encounter the other side and get outside of our bedrock of beliefs.
I think that is 100% true, Claudia, and I think you've hit the nail on the head when I wanted to put a pun on it. But, you know, and you think Dante's own life, just to kind of, I suppose, finish up on this point, Dante's own life, that, you know, 6 years later, he does find himself working for the Malaspina, who would have been, you know, arch enemies back in Florence in 1300. That this is the Dante that is, you know, has to become parte a se stesso, who has to go it alone, unfortunately, because he's been excluded from the community. But at the same time, through that process of exclusion, finds a different kind of freedom, and a freedom that is ultimately going to be articulated through the writing of this poem.
Absolutely. I think this is the final Chiori in our conversation. Thank you very much, Daragh. Thank you so much. Cheers.